The desert sun beat down like a hammer against Jared Kane's shoulders, each step a steady grind across the powder-dry flats. His boots sank into the cracked ochre soil, crunching with the weight of another long day spent stalking game that never came close enough. The air shimmered in the distance, a heat mirage that promised water and shade where none existed. His canteen sloshed faintly at his side, a reminder that even the machines he relied on could only wring so much life from this barren world. He paused at a rise, wiping sweat from his brow with a calloused hand. The rifle across his back caught the sun, dull metal glinting for a heartbeat before he shifted it out of sight. Outdated, heavy, prone to jamming if he neglected it, but it was the last relic of Earth he allowed himself. It had carried him through the war at Proxima, through the night when everything he had built was ripped apart, and now it carried him through exile. Jared adjusted the sling and muttered, "Another day, another disappointment," the words rasping out into the emptiness. No one answered. No one ever did. Ahead, the silhouette of his homestead shimmered against the horizon, a squat fortress of stone blocks mortared with local sand, solar panels gleaming on the roof like dull mirrors. The moisture farm nearby chugged faintly, thin white mist rising where its condenser fins bled the sky for scraps of water. His haven, his cell. It was both Dot as he started down the slope. Something shifted in the core of his vision. A flicker of movement among the weathered ruins that dotted the landscape, crumbling columns and tumbled walls, relics of a people who had ruled this desert long before his species had crossed the stars. Jared stopped cold, instincts honed from 15 years of service sharpening his senses. His hand went to his sidearm before the thought even formed. The ruins were usually silent. Lizards and carrion birds made their homes there, nothing else. A faint scraping reached him, like stone dragged across stone. He frowned, scanning the shadows that pooled between the ancient blocks. The sun was sinking, casting the ruins in bands of ochre and deep purple, a palette made for concealment. His voice came out harsh with disuse. "Hello?" It carried across the still air. No response. He took a cautious step forward, boots crunching softly, hand steady on his weapon. Dot, something glinted. Not stone, not metal weathered by centuries, but a flash of color blue, startling and vibrant, gone almost as soon as he saw it. Jared drew his weapon and raised his voice. "Show yourself." This time it was not a request. Silence stretched, the only sound his own breathing and the distant hum of his farm. Then, from behind a toppled column, a figure moved into view. Jared's breath caught despite himself. She was humanoid, but unmistakably alien. Skin the color of deep sky just after sunset, shimmering faintly as though catching light where there was none. Braided hair fell across her shoulders in intricate patterns, glinting with metallic threads. Her eyes large, silver, slit-pupiled, like a cat's fixed on him with wary intensity. The black combat suit clinging to her frame was torn and scorched, dark stains marking her side where blood seeped sluggishly. Jared lowered his weapon an inch, just enough to show he was thinking rather than threatening. "You're hurt," he said, voice softer now. She tensed, one hand pressed against her side, but made no move to flee. Slowly, deliberately, he holstered the gun. He unhooked his canteen, unscrewing the cap, and held it out. "Water," he said, his voice carrying a gentleness he had nearly forgotten he possessed. Her silver eyes flickered with something he could not read: fear, suspicion, longing, and then, with a tremor in her hand, she reached for the canteen. Their fingers brushed. Her skin was cool against his, impossibly so in this furnace of a world, and a jolt went through him, sharp and unexpected. She drank deeply, throat working as if every drop mattered more than air itself. When she handed the canteen back, she gave the smallest of nods. Gratitude, maybe. Jared stood rooted in the desert dusk, the empty world suddenly holding more than silence for the first time in years. Jared watched her drain the last drops of water as if she had not tasted it in days. Her hand trembled as she returned the canteen, the faint sheen of blood at her side making it clear she would not stand much longer. For a moment, the ruins were still only the sigh of the evening wind stirring sand between the ancient stones. He gestured back toward his homestead, a dark silhouette on the horizon. "I've got supplies. Medical kit, shelter." He kept his tone low, steady, like coaxing a wounded animal. Her gaze followed his hand, then returned to him. Silver eyes narrowed, suspicion etched into every line of her delicate, unfamiliar features. She tried to rise. The effort made her stumble against the cracked stone, and Jared's instincts overrode caution. He closed the distance in 2 strides, catching her before she collapsed completely. Her body was lighter than he expected, sinew and strength hidden beneath exhaustion. She stiffened at his touch, a sharp intake of breath escaping her lips, but she did not resist as he steadied her against his shoulder. "Easy," he murmured, guiding her weight carefully. "Let me help you." The trek across the sand was slow, the sinking sun throwing long shadows before them. Each step, Jared felt the heat of the desert bleeding into chill twilight. The woman leaned into him reluctantly, her breath ragged. Up close, he noticed the strange patterns across her blue skin-fine lines, like tattoos or scars. Yet they seemed organic, woven into her flesh by design of nature, or ancestry dot. By the time they reached the heavy steel door of his dwelling, her legs buckled completely. Jared kicked the entry panel and half-carried her inside. The shift in air cooler, recycled through his scrubbers, seemed to ease her, though she barely remained conscious as he eased her onto the only bed in the room. His Spartan home was little more than stone walls, a table, a chair, and racks of tools, but it was safe. He fetched his battered medkit from a shelf, snapping it open with the ease of habit. Kneeling at her side, he peeled back the torn fabric of her suit. The wound along her ribs was deep, seared at the edges, likely from some energy weapon. He cleaned it with antiseptic, her sharp hiss of pain confirming that she was very much aware of what he was doing. "This will sting," he muttered, more for himself than her dot as he worked. He talked. Old Marine reflex-filled silence with sound. "Keep the patient awake. Name's Jared Kane. Used to be a Marine, back before Proxima. Now just a man out here fixing solar panels and hunting lizards." His hands moved efficiently. Gauze, sealant spray, pressure bandage. The routine steadied him in a way nothing else had for years. When he looked up, her silver eyes were fixed on him, unblinking, as if weighing every word. Finally, she lifted one trembling hand and placed it lightly against his wrist. With her other hand, she touched her chest. "Lysara," she whispered, her voice soft but clear, melodic even in weakness. The sound of it startled him. He hadn't expected words, let alone understanding. "Lysara?" he repeated carefully. She nodded once, the gesture slow but deliberate. "Well, Lysara," he said quietly, "you're safe here." Her eyelids fluttered. Exhaustion claimed her before she could respond. Jared sat back on his heels, studying the alien woman asleep on his bed. He told himself he'd done his duty no different from a field medic, patching up a comrade, but the truth lingered in his chest like a weight he hadn't felt in years. Outside, the desert night deepened, stars piercing the sky in cold brilliance. Jared took his rifle to the window and cleaned it by habit, but his thoughts were not on the weapon. They were on the stranger lying in his room, the shimmer of her skin, the strength buried beneath her fragility, and the way her eyes had looked into his as though she already knew the shape of his solitude. When dawn finally touched the horizon, Jared rose to check on her. But the bed was empty, the sheets still warm, the bandages spotted with her blood, but Lysara herself was gone. Jared stood in the doorway of his dwelling, scanning the endless sands. Nothing but wind, dust, and the silent ruins. For a man who had chosen solitude, he found the absence oddly sharp. He muttered into the emptiness, "Guess that's that," though the name lingered on his tongue, refusing to let go. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the desert kept its secrets. The desert morning stretched wide and empty, the kind of silence Jared Kane had once craved and now found unbearable. The sheets on his bed were still tangled. Faint streaks of blue blood dried into the rough fabric, proof that the woman Lizara had been real and not some fever dream born of heatstroke and loneliness. Yet she was gone, vanished without a sound, as though the night had swallowed her back into the ruins. Jared busied himself with the rituals of survival, trying to ignore the hollowness in his chest. He checked the moisture collectors, scraped thin frost from their condensers into his water stores, recalibrated the solar panels, and patched a crack in the outer wall where the last dust storm had clawed at his home. Each task was methodical, designed to tether his thoughts, but nothing could erase the memory of her silver eyes or the soft weight of her hand on his wrist. Braced his rifle against the railing and watched as the shapes took form out of the haze. Massive beasts loped across the desert, their strides smooth and predatory. They were like tigers, but larger four-legged titans with glowing stripes running down their flanks, their eyes burning with bioluminescent fire. The ground shook under their approach, each beast's movement so fluid it seemed impossible something so large could move with such grace. And riding them were warriors. Dozens of them. Blue-skinned figures clad in ornate armor that shimmered like metal forged from moonlight, weapons slung across their backs, braids glinting with silver threads. They formed into a precise formation as they neared, circling his homestead with disciplined ease, mounts pacing in unison. Jared tightened his grip on the rifle, but did not raise it. He knew a lost cause when he saw one. This was no band of raiders. This was an army, and his solitary life had just been crushed beneath its weight. The warriors parted, a deliberate corridor opening in their ranks. From the dust and heat rode the largest of the beasts, its stripes blazing brighter than the rest. On its back sat a figure who made Jared's heart lurch, Lizara, but not the fragile, wounded woman he had carried into his home. She sat tall and regal, her posture straight, her wounds healed and marked only by faint silver scars. Her armor was polished, her hair interwoven with gleaming threads, and a circlet rested upon her brow. She looked every inch the commander, every inch the royalty she must have been all along. The beast came to a halt at the edge of his porch, and she dismounted with fluid grace. Sand whispered under her boots as she approached, silver eyes locked on his. Jared's rifle hung loose at his side, useless against what surrounded him, but his jaw tightened. "You saved my life," Lizara said, her voice no longer weak and wavering but strong, commanding, a voice meant to carry across battlefields. Jared's throat worked before he managed a rough reply. "You're looking better." A flicker of a smile touched her lips. The Kurvani healed quickly. She gestured to the warriors arrayed around them, their mounts shifting restlessly. "These are my people. You showed me honor when I was alone. By our most sacred laws, you must now receive a worthy reward." He blinked, baffled. "I didn't do it for a reward." Her eyes gleamed, and she took one final step closer. "Then you will accept this not as payment, but as destiny." She lifted her voice so all could hear, and the warriors thumped their chests in unison, the sound like thunder rolling across the sand. "I am Lizara Nyos, first daughter of the High Council," she declared, her gaze never leaving his. "And this human Jared Kane is my chosen mate." The words struck harder than any bullet. Jared felt the ground tilt beneath him as the truth settled like iron in his chest. The hermit who had sought only silence was suddenly bound by alien law to a people he had never known, to a woman who had stepped out of ruin and into his life. The desert, which had once held only solitude, now echoed with the roar of beasts, the gleam of armor, and the promise of a fate he had never asked for. Jared Kane had faced ambushes before, the kind where every instinct screamed that the walls were closing in, that no amount of training could change the odds. That same tight coil wound through him now as the ring of mounted warriors shifted around his homestead, their tiger-like beasts pawing the sand with glowing claws. But these weren't raiders looking to plunder. Their precision, their discipline, the unity in their movements, all of it told him this was something older, deeper, bound by tradition. Lysara stood only a few feet away, her presence commanding in a way that unsettled him more than the circle of spears and blades. She was transformed from the bloodied stranger he had carried into his bed the night before, regal, composed. Every motion told him she belonged here, at the head of this thunderous host. "You've got the wrong man," Jared said, breaking the silence. His voice sounded too small against the desert dusk, but he kept it steady. "I patched you up, gave you water. That's all." Lysara tilted her head, silver eyes reflecting the last streaks of sunlight. "For us, that is everything." Her tone brooked no argument. "You offered life when death circled me. Our laws are clear. The one who saves the first daughter is bound to her. By right, by blood, by the will of the Kirvani." The words landed like a weight on his chest. Around them, the warriors beat a fist to their breastplates in unison, the sound rolling outward like distant thunder. His hand twitched toward his rifle, then fell away. A weapon wouldn't get him out of this. "You don't understand," he pressed. "I'm not. I didn't come here to join anyone's laws. I live out here to be left alone." His gaze flicked across the line of riders, the glint of their weapons, the sheer power coiled in their glowing mounts. He muttered, almost to himself, "And something tells me that option's gone." Lysara stepped closer, enough that he caught the cool scent of her skin, some metallic tongue beneath the desert air. "You think solitude is freedom," she said softly. "I saw your eyes last night. I felt the weight you carry. Alone, you bury yourself. With us, with me, you rise." Jared let out a laugh, humorless and rough. "I'm not exactly husband material." The faintest smile ghosted across her lips, one that didn't reach her eyes. "Neither am I bride material in your terms. Yet the law binds us. Our tribesmen witness it now." One of the riders urged his beast forward, leading a second Kershai. The creature's stripes glowed like molten silver, its great head lowering until its eyes locked with Jared's, intelligent, searching. Lysara gestured to it with a hand marked by thin silver scars. "This one has chosen you." "A Kershai does not make mistakes." Jared stared at the beast. Its breath came in hot, rhythmic bursts, sand curling beneath its paws. Everything in him wanted to step back, to refuse, to cling to the last shreds of the solitude he had fought so hard to keep. But the way the animal looked at him calm, expectant, made his chest tighten. He muttered, "Hell, I never even wanted a dog." Lysara's silver eyes gleamed. "You wanted a reason." The warriors struck their chests again, this time in a rhythm that pulsed like a heartbeat. The desert echoed with it, a living drum that made the ground itself tremble. Lysara raised her hand, and the sound cut off in perfect unison. She spoke the words as if they were carved into stone. "Jared Kane of Earth, you are no longer hermit. You are of the Kirvani now. My mate, my equal, my chosen." The declaration rippled outward through the host, carried in the guttural chants of 100 throats. The Kershai beside him bowed its head lower. An offer or a command? Jared swallowed hard, his fingers curling into fists at his side. For years, he had built walls thick enough to keep out the galaxy. Now, in the space of a heartbeat, Those walls had shattered beneath the weight of a promise he had never asked for. And as the desert night settled in, stars igniting overhead, Jared realized the truth with cold clarity. Whatever he had been yesterday, ex-marine, exile, hermit, was already gone. Tomorrow, he would ride with a tribe that called him family. Tomorrow, he would walk beside a woman who had named him husband. The desert had given him silence for 15 years. Now it had given him destiny. The night that followed was restless. Jared lay awake on a woven mat the Kurvani warriors had unrolled for him near his porch, staring at the stars as the guttural purr of their mounts rumbled in the dark like thunder muted by distance. The desert air had cooled, but not his thoughts. Solitude had been his shield for years. Now he found himself penned inside a circle of glowing-eyed beasts and silver-skinned warriors, bound by a law he didn't understand not at dawn. Lysara approached him as if she had been waiting for the first light. She wore armor polished to a dull shine, her braids threaded with silver cords that caught the sunrise. He studied her, trying to reconcile the wounded fugitive who had gasped for water in his arms with the regal figure now commanding a tribe. "You should eat," she said, offering him a strip of dried meat that smelled faintly of spice. Her voice was calm, but her eyes never left his face, measuring him like a commander assessing a recruit. He took the meat, but didn't eat it. "You still haven't explained what exactly you've dragged me into." Her silver pupils narrowed slightly. "You saved my life. Among the Kurvani, that act binds us. By ancient law, you are now my mate." Jared let out a dry laugh. "Where I come from, people usually date first. Maybe argue over bad coffee. I'm not exactly in the market for a wife, alien princess or not." The words made her tilt her head. "Princess? You're the first daughter of the High Council. That's as close to a princess as it gets." Lysara considered this, her lips curving faintly. "If that is your word for one who leads, then so be it. But I am not a symbol to be carried on cushions. I train. I bleed. I fight. My people follow me because I earn it every day." Something in her tone struck him pride edged with loneliness. Jared looked away, chewing the strip of meat at last. The taste was sharp, foreign, but not unpleasant. Their journey began shortly after. Warriors saddled their Kershai, the striped mounts bowing low to accept riders. One of them guided Jared to his beast, a massive animal whose eyes glowed like twin lanterns. The creature lowered itself with surprising gentleness. Jared's heart thudded. "I've never ridden anything bigger than a horse," he muttered. Humbled, a telepathic tiger. No pressure. The mount rumbled in its chest, a low sound that vibrated through Jared's legs as he climbed onto the saddle. Against all odds, the creature rose smoothly, adjusting to his weight with uncanny precision. It felt less like riding and more like being carried by something that knew his balance before he did. The column set out across the desert, dust rising in plumes behind them. Jared's mount fell naturally into step beside Lysara's, as if the beasts themselves recognized the bond declared the night before. Around them, the other warriors rode in a protective ring, their movements as disciplined as a military drill. Hours passed beneath the relentless sun. Jared found himself stealing glances at Lysara. She rode with effortless grace, her posture perfect even after miles of travel. At times, she pointed to distant landmarks, wind-sculpted cliffs, half-buried ruins, and explained their meaning in her people's history. Her voice, melodic and precise, made the harsh desert seem less empty dot as the sun dipped toward evening. They stopped at a rocky outcropping where the warriors erected a temporary camp with practiced efficiency. Fires crackled, casting shifting light over silver eyes and gleaming armor. Jared sat apart at first, sharpening his rifle by habit, but Lysara joined him, her own meal untouched in her hands. "You are quiet," she said. "I'm thinking," he replied. "Of what?" He hesitated. The truth came out anyway. That I don't belong here. That I've spent years keeping people out, and now I'm surrounded by an army calling me family. Her gaze softened. You showed me mercy when you could have chosen violence. Among my people, that is a strength few possess. You may not believe you belong, but the law and my heart say otherwise. Jared stared into the fire, the flames dancing in her silver eyes. He remembered Sarah, remembered the way she had smiled at him before the disaster at Proxima tore her away. For years, he had convinced himself that grief was safer than hope. Yet here sat an alien woman, bound to him by law and maybe something more, offering not pity but recognition. He met her gaze at last. This marriage custom, is it just politics for your people? Or does it ever mean something more? Lysara's lips curved into a faint smile. The law binds us, but what we choose to build between us, that is ours alone. The fire crackled, and for the first time in years, Jared let the silence sit between them without filling it with ghosts. He realized then that whatever lay ahead, tests, battles, politics, it had already begun changing him. Solitude was no longer enough. And as Lysara's cool hand brushed against his, deliberate and steady, he felt the truth settle deep in his chest. He wasn't sure he wanted solitude anymore. The second day on the march tested Jared Kane in ways he hadn't expected. The desert stretched on without end, dunes like rolling seas of flame beneath a merciless sky. Heat shimmered on the horizon, bending the air into illusions of water and cities that weren't there. He rode his Kershai with growing familiarity, leaning into its stride, learning the subtle shift of muscle that meant it would turn before he even willed it. The warriors moved like a single organism, disciplined, silent save for the occasional barked command in a language Jared could not follow. He felt their eyes on him, measuring, judging, some with curiosity, others with suspicion. He knew soldiers well enough to understand what was unspoken. They respected Lysara, but whether they would respect him remained unproven doubt by evening. The caravan entered a grove unlike anything Jared had seen on Doritos. Ancient trees rose from the sand, their trunks white as bone, their leaves glowing faintly with a luminescence that painted the dusk in shades of blue and green. A natural spring bubbled into a pool at the grove's heart, water clear as glass, moonlight catching on its surface like scattered silver coins. The air was sweet, fragrant with blossoms that pulsed faintly as if breathing. Lysara guided her mount beside his. This place is called Narvali, the dreaming heart. It is sacred to us. Jared slid down from his Kershai, boots sinking into cool moss instead of sand for the first time in years. The sensation was almost disorienting, a reminder of forests long lost to him. He turned, taking it all in. Doesn't look like the kind of place you'd want to camp an army. Her silver eyes glimmered. No battle is fought here. Narvali is for communion. She hesitated, her usual certainty giving way to something more tentative. If you are willing, I would share the Telai with you tonight. Jared raised an eyebrow. That sounds intimate. It is, she admitted, a faint flush deepening the blue of her cheeks. The Telai is not flesh. It is spirit. We touch the water, then each other. Our memories, our truths, flow between us. If there is to be a bond between us, this is how it begins. He stared at the glowing pool, unease tightening in his chest. His past was a wound he had never allowed anyone to see. The massacre at Proxima, Sarah's face in those final moments. Years of self-imposed exile. He wasn't sure he wanted anyone inside that darkness. Yet the way Lysara looked at him open, vulnerable despite her armor and titles, made something inside him soften. All right, he said finally, his voice low. Show me how. They knelt across from one another at the pool's edge. Lysara dipped her fingers into the water, then reached for his temple. He mirrored her gesture, fingertips brushing her cool skin. The instant they touched, the world dissolved. Jared was no longer in his body. He was in hers, training as a child under her father's stern gaze. The weight of command pressed on her shoulders before she was grown. Loneliness so deep it gnawed at her, despite the admiration of thousands. The ambush in the desert, the searing pain of the wound, the desperate crawl into the ruins. And beneath it all, her shock at the human who had given her water without asking who she was, her cautious fascination with his rough kindness. Then it shifted. She was in him. Childhood on Earth, the camaraderie of Marines, the black roar of Proxima's disaster, blood and fire, and Sarah's hand slipping from his as the ceiling collapsed. His retreat to Doritos, burying himself in silence, convinced he didn't deserve more than dust and solitude. And then her. The jolt when their fingers brushed over a canteen. The way her silver eyes cut through the walls he thought unbreakable. They returned to themselves kneeling by the pool, tears streaking both their faces. The grove shimmered around them, leaves pulsing brighter, as if the ancient place bore witness. Lysara's voice broke the silence. "Now you know me." Jared swallowed hard. "And you know me." She moved around the pool, kneeling in front of him, taking his hands in hers. "What happened at Proxima? It was not your fault. You saved who you could. As you saved me." Her words cracked something inside him. The dam of guilt and grief he had carried for years burst. He pulled her against him, his body shaking with a release he hadn't allowed himself in a decade. She held him fiercely, her cool skin a balm against his heat. When their lips met, it felt inevitable, a culmination rather than a beginning. The kiss deepened, a merging of sorrow and hope, of truths laid bare. They lay together beneath the glowing canopy, her fingers tracing the scars on his chest, as if rewriting his history with each touch. But peace was fleeting. A cry shattered the night sharp, cut short. Jared jolted upright, Lysara already on her feet, blade drawn. Shadows moved among the trees, darker than the glow of Narvali's leaves. Figures in crimson-accented armor, blades gleaming like blood in the moonlight. Lysara's voice was ice. "Morani." Jared raised his rifle, heart hammering. Around them, the sacred grove filled with the clash of steel and the guttural roars of Kershai. The communion had bound them. Now the night would test if that bond could withstand war. The grove that only moments ago had been a cathedral of light and memory now erupted into chaos. Narvali's luminous leaves pulsed furiously, glowing brighter each time steel struck steel, each time a body fell. Jared dropped to one knee, rifle braced, his mind snapping back into the brutal clarity of combat he thought he had left behind on Proxima. The Morani poured through the trees like shadows given form armor black as obsidian, streaked with crimson, eyes burning with fanatic purpose. He squeezed the trigger, the rifle bucking against his shoulder, a sharp crack echoing alien against the guttural cries. One of the Morani crumpled mid-swing, his curved blade clattering harmlessly into the moss. The sound froze others for a split-second. Energy weapons and blades were their norm. Few had ever heard the thunder of chemical fire. Lysara moved beside him, a blur of grace and lethal efficiency. Her curved blade danced arcs of silver, severing strikes, deflecting thrusts, cutting down attackers with fluid precision. She barked orders in her language, her warriors snapping into coordinated defense, forming a ring around the pool. The Narvali itself seemed alive, leaves flaring brighter when touched by the sacred water that Jared's boots splashed through, their glow strobing the grove into a battlefield of light and shadow. Then a voice rolled through the chaos, deep, mocking, cutting the night in half. The first daughter takes a human mate. How desperate the Vostai must be. The Morani parted like a tide, and from their ranks stepped a figure that dwarfed them all. Midnight blue skin stretched over corded muscle, his armor etched in red that gleamed like fresh blood. His head was shaved save for a single braid, long and heavy, falling down his back. His eyes glowed molten silver, hard as carved steel. "Dreth," Lysara hissed, her voice low and venomous. The Morani commander regarded her with cold amusement. "Surrender, and I will spare your people needless bloodshed. Submit, and perhaps even your pet will live." His gaze flicked to Jared with disdain. Something primal stirred in Jared's chest. He rose from cover, rifle cradled in his arms, voice rough but steady. "I'm nobody's pet." Dreth's sneer deepened. "Primitive creature. You meddle in affairs beyond your comprehension." Lysara stepped forward, fury sharpening her tone. "By ancient law, Jared Kane is my chosen mate. To strike him is to defy the very foundations of Kurvane tradition." Dreth barked a laugh, dark and jagged. "Traditions break, and when they do, stronger hands forge new ones." He lifted his blade, pointing it at Jared. "If you think your claim has merit, human, then face me. 1-on-1. Let the gods and the moons decide." The grove fell silent. The warriors Vastai and Morani alike watched, breaths held. Even the Kershai circled closer, their glowing stripes pulsing with restless anticipation. Jared's gut clenched. He remembered Proxima, remembered leading men into slaughter, remembered losing Sarah beneath collapsing walls. He had sworn never again. And yet, staring into Dreth's molten eyes, he felt a different fire kindle, the communion still thrumming in his veins, Lysara's memories braided with his own, the pulse of Narvali's living light burning around them. "Fine," Jared said, lowering his rifle onto its strap. 1-on-1. Lysara's hand shot out, gripping his arm, her silver eyes wide. "He's one of the most skilled fighters of our age." "Don't do this." Jared leaned close, voice low, steady. "I'm not planning to win by being stronger or faster. Trust me." Reluctantly, she released him. They squared off at the grove's heart, the sacred pool between them. Dreth circled with predatory confidence, his blade gleaming. Jared kept his stance low, measuring, buying seconds. The luminescent leaves above flared brighter with each shift of air, each tremor of the ground. An idea took root. Dreth lunged. Jared barely dodged, the blade carving sparks off stone. Another strike faster, harder. Jared retreated, step by step, drawing him deeper beneath the canopy where the leaves hung thickest. "Is this how humans fight?" Dreth mocked. "By running?" "No," Jared said, backing toward the pool. "This is how we win." He dipped his hand into the sacred water, droplets clinging to his skin. Then he flung them upward. The drops arced into the canopy, striking the glowing leaves. The grove exploded with blinding brilliance. The Morani screamed, blinded, staggering as the Narvalet reacted to its own water, light flaring so bright it seared the night into day. Jared had closed his eyes at the last second, guided by marine instinct, and now moved with precision born of training and desperation. He drove a boot into Dreth's knee, felt the joint buckle, and slammed an elbow into the commander's chest. Dreth toppled, his blade clattering against stone. When the light faded, Jared stood over him, boot pressing down on the commander's chest. The Morani murmured in shock, their discipline fracturing. The Vostai roared their approval, chests thumping like drums. Dreth's silver eyes burned with fury. The prophecy speaks truth. You bring destruction to our ways. Lysara stepped beside Jared, her hand firm on his shoulder. No, Dreth, he brings change. Whether it destroys or saves us depends on what we choose. The warriors on both sides shifted, torn between old loyalties and new possibilities. A prophecy, once a story whispered in temples, now stood embodied before them in the form of a weary human and a defiant first daughter. and in that charged silence, Jared knew nothing about his life would ever return to the solitude of before. The desert had chosen him. The Kurvani had bound him. And fate had just dealt him a role he had never wanted: savior, husband, outsider turned equal dot above them. The twin moons climbed higher, their light falling across the grove like judgment.